After you complete your harvest, all your problems are chemical.
Welcome to the Greener Grass podcast from BlueBird Botanicals. I'm your host, Lex Pelger. Today's interview comes from the laboratory of Dr. Joseph DiVerdi. He's a chemist at Colorado State University in the College of Natural Sciences, and he's also the founder of XTR Labs and XTR Systems, a company that provides chemical intelligence to the hemp and cannabis industries. Today he shares on his rather heretical thoughts on the effect of terpenes, and more about the rich chemistry behind the smell of cannabis. This show is brought to you by BlueBird Botanicals, to spread education about cannabis and other things on the greener side of life. BlueBird CBD oil comes from farms in southern Colorado and is grown using only water, soil, and sunlight. Go to bluebirdbotanicals.com for more info. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here in the lab of Dr. Joseph DiVerdi. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And so before we get into your work with terpenes and analytical chemistry, maybe you can tell me a little bit about what it was like for you realizing that science was what you wanted to be doing and how that path looked for you.
Sure. Well, your listenership won't know from the color of my hair. My students say that I look like Rick from Rick and Morty. But I got into science at a very young age. I would say it was about 4 years old when it was around Christmas time, and I got a hold of Christmas tree lights that were on the tree, and I unscrewed one of the bulbs and stuck my pinky inside there and started getting a shock and said, "This is fantastic." I never looked back since then. Subsequent to that, fast forward a few years, my uncle bought me a Gilbert chemistry set, which really helped advance my basement laboratory where I used to make all kinds of pyrotechnics. My current statement is the reasons that I got into chemistry were twofold: pyrotechnics and psychedelics. And advanced through there. Got to high school, did a whole bunch of science stuff. I was in a science track and went to college. I guess the aside from this is that when I was born, the day I was born, my father decided that I was to be a physician. And I had to fight with that for the first 18 years of my life. And I got to college. I was sent to a college to go and become pre-med, which I had no intention of doing. And I learned about biochemistry there. And this was back in the 70s. Turns out a particularly insightful pair of professors invited me to become the inaugural biochemistry major in my college. That's how long ago I was in college. That was the first biochemistry major there.
Wow, got to start the program.
Got to start the program, that's right. And then after that, went over to graduate school and became emancipated because I didn't need to rely on funds from home anymore. And then I carried on and went to graduate school, and then I postdoced in what was the gem of AT&T, Bell Laboratories. Went off to the pharmaceutical industry for a few years. Did not like working with small animals. That was a serious bummer. And went off, and then came out to Colorado to help found a scientific instrumentation company. I had the time of my life here and never looked back. And went to Silicon Valley for a little while, came back, and now we're here in the university and starting a small company here, XTR Systems, doing business as XTR Laboratories. That's standard website. And as Lex mentioned, we provide chemical intelligence to the Colorado's hemp and cannabis industries. One of my bylines is, after you complete your harvest, all your problems are chemical. And it's really true. Anything you want to do with cannabis or hemp involves doing chemistry. And I have worked very hard to become a really knowledgeable person on cannabis chemistry. And I continue to work on that every day and offer that knowledge up as a consultancy to various members of the cannabis industry, cultivators, concentrators, food producers, analysts, all sorts of stuff. I also, besides having the PhD in chemistry, I went back a couple of years, many years ago now, went back, got an MBA, so I know about business and strategic analysis and planning. So we got the whole package here. If you have any need for this, come to XTR and we'll help you out with that.
And so as you were thinking about founding this business, what questions were you seeing unanswered that would be the things that you knew you'd be able to help with?
Yeah, so again, flashback to high school when back in the 70s, which is when I became seriously involved in the New York marijuana scene. We funneled a lot of red Lebanese hash into the country then, but just forget I said that. Way back when we were experimentalists, and I was an experimental chemist, and so I started wanted to learn how to synthesize LSD, and as it turns out, as in many many synthetic problems, it's a lot easier if you let a plant or a spore or a mold or a yeast or some kind of living thing create the basic framework for you and then modify it later. So I started growing ergot mold, which is well known in the literature as a source of lysergic acid. And so my friends and I started experimenting with that, and that's how that started.
Wow, so you kind of made your own version of the old Eleusinian mysteries, huh?
We tried. It was extremely primitive. I look back to that. That's 45 years ago. I knew a lot less. I had access to a lot less equipment and tools. So it was very difficult. But we tried. We did what we could with what we had. Come out today and say, well, here in the 2000s, we have a very progressive state of Colorado where we've legalized cannabis, and I thought that this was a great opportunity to combine two big loves there. The enjoying the pleasures of cannabis and using the chemistry to make the world a better place, to have better products, more interesting products, help people build more reliable products. And I think of folks in the industry chain. You should learn how to do that, how to make things. And then we work on making interesting and new things.
And so what do you think are some of the biggest chemical challenges for all of these new operations popping up all over the West?
Yeah. So in some regard, it's interesting. The MBA comes into here because some of it is technological being botanical, chemical, mineralogical, and then some of it is business. I spend a lot of time thinking about business strategy and trying to predict where the industry is going to go. And we've come into this in this decade we've come in from the cold, where everything is illegal, and then folks are now growing things. They're growing things privately, growing things professionally in business. There are small grows, there are large grows, and we always wonder how is this going to advance? Is the pharmaceutical industry going to take over cannabis? Okay, that's one of the questions. We can talk about the particulars. Or is the alcoholic beverage industry who's going to take over cannabis is one of the questions. And I think that while there's going to be growth and segmentation in the business world, it's going to be stratified. Using beer as an example, we have in Fort Collins an Anheuser-Busch factory. Down in Denver, right, Coors Beer Factory. And if you're a beer aficionado, your nose is up in the air right now. That stuff's carbon dioxide, water, ethanol, and nothing else. And if you're a craft brewer, you're either doing small volumes, or if you're lucky enough to be someone like New Belgium here or Dell's, you're a bigger volume. But those two beer businesses can coexist. In fact, I say two businesses, the whole continuum from the folks who make beer in their bathtubs and they're learning about microbiology there. You can craft beer. You can make crappy beer. You can make good beer. If you pay attention, your beer will get better. I think it's very parallel in the cannabis world. I think there's going to be large producers of probably commodity weed. Is going to be the worst weed in the world, And then there are going to be other folks who spend time crafting it. Same with the wine industry. You can look at the wine industry as a parallel industry. You look at coffee industry. All of these industries are flavors and fragrances industries, which is another area of profound interest to me, flavors and fragrances. I think that the way that we're going to advance in this country, perhaps in the world, there will be a continuum of producers. The way the pharmaceutical industry works, and I learned this from the little time that I spent in there, is the pharmaceutical industry likes to synthesize new molecules that it can patent and own. And no one else can use them unless they say that it can be used. And so they own that molecule. Well, you can't patent THC. But I'm willing to venture a big bet that pharmaceutical companies are probably investing in little companies like XTR who are more interested in doing synthetic work, and they're taking THC and making derivatives of that, which are slightly different chemically, yet unique enough that they would be able to patent them. Now, they're not going to go patent them now because they're going to get the feds. How can you patent it? It's without running amok of the Department of Justice. But they're developing their intellectual property portfolios, and when the time is right, they'll unleash them and they'll have that. That's what I think the pharmaceutical world is going to do. Are we so Puritan in this country that we just can't enjoy getting high?
Yes.
I think, what do we do with alcohol? Alcohol, I mean, what are we curing with alcohol? We're probably causing more trouble with alcohol than we do benefits. I say, look, maybe why do we have to be so puritanical and say we can't enjoy the fruits of what this earth provides us? Yet we've got all this baggage that we've got to get past and move forward with that.
And so, in terms of you helping this industry go at all of these different levels, if you were put in charge of,
if I were king,
yeah, especially of the regulations, even for these from the giants down to the smallest ones, what would you see as some of the chemical laws that should be in place for everybody's safety?
It's a good question, and I suspect that you recall the presentation, one of the presentations I gave recently at the Institute for Cannabis Research in Pueblo. We had an annual conference in April of this year, and one of the issues that I brought up and opined upon was labeling. These days, we require from the Colorado Regulatory Commission, we require cannabis products to be labeled in terms of potency. Potency means the concentration of THC, the psychoactive ingredient, or THCA, depending on how it's all broken down. They have to be labeled, it has to be measured, and it has to be labeled on there, just like calories and grams of fat and grams of sugar have to be on all kinds of other products. It's pretty remarkable when I look at packaging and I see labels that consist of what we in the business call 4 significant figures. What that means is the label on the side says that this flower contains 26.57% THC. 4 significant figures to a scientist is great. If one can measure something that well, that is a fabulous thing. More times than not, it's in an untrained hands, it's difficult to get 2 sig figs, 26%. And the 0.57% doesn't mean anything.
Can you give a technical definition of significant figures?
Significant figures is a statistical term, and it says how precisely can you measure something. Let me give you an example in a more traditional field. Let's say you're measuring lengths of wood. You're building something, and you need some pieces of wood that are 10 feet long. All right, that's 120 inches. And How precisely do you need to have the length of that wood? Is it 120.0 inches or 120.00 inches, or is it to the nearest inch? This is a measure of the precision or accuracy, the significance of how well you can measure it. You speak to a trained craftsperson, he or she will tell you, we're framing a house, we need to get it to 1/4 of an inch. You could report the length of these boards to better than that, but it doesn't matter. If you're doing some precision craft work, let's say you're making a small piece of something the size of a shoebox of some fine precision work, and you're using different materials, you may need to measure that more precisely. You will talk to a machinist, someone who works in aluminum or steel or plastic. They can be measuring things much more precisely. And by precisely, it means what percentage of the total value is the uncertainty. Not error, we call it uncertainty. There's another misnomer. So if I measure something and say it's 100 inches long, and I know it's good to plus or minus 10 inches, I'm good to 10 divided by 100, 10%. If I say it's good to plus or minus 1 inch, it's good to 1%. If I say it's plus or minus 1/10 of an inch, that's 1/10 of a percent. The same thing is true of other things that we do. Another good example is that bottle of ibuprofen that you're popping pills from because you're either sore from working in the garden or climbing up mountains or because you got a headache. It says on the side of the package, it says 200 milligrams ibuprofen. How precisely is that known? Is it 200 plus or minus 1 milligram? Is it 200 plus or minus 10 milligrams? Or is it 2 plus or minus 1/10 of a milligram? Probably it's around the range of about 1 milligram. It's probably good to plus or minus 0.5%. I don't know exactly. I'm just pulling that example out of the air. I would be fine for me. I take a couple of pills and I say, well, I know I'm taking a pill. It's 200 milligrams, migs we call them. If it was only good to 10%, I could be taking anywhere from 220 to 180 milligrams. Now, with ibuprofen, no problem. I'm not worried about that. If I were working with something like cisplatin or some anti-cancer drugs, I would be really want to have the value of that known precisely, because many of these particular very powerful medicines are extremely toxic and they have to be dosed very, very well. Things like ibuprofen, piece of cake. Things like alcohol is a piece of cake. We measure beer, and we report the alcohol by volume parameter, ABV, percent ABV. And a lot of beers are like 6.5% alcohol, 6.4%. Does it really matter to you whether it's 6.4 or 6.5? Is that really going to make a difference between either how much you drink, how drunk you're going to get, the chances of you're getting laid, whatever the possibility is? It doesn't matter that much. So it's not necessary to report that to greater significance. The same is true of cannabis. It's not really necessary to go below the 1% level. It's 26%, it's 35%, it's 2%, it's 12%. That's plenty. My recommendation, I've taken that a step further and say, to make it easier for the consuming public, which doesn't have the advantages of having all the training in analytic chemistry, I think it would make sense to just use 5% bands. Say this product is 0 to 5% THC. This product is 5 to 10, 15 to 20, 20 to 25. That's sufficient. I mean, you go out and buy a bottle of beer or buy a bottle of wine, you're expecting it to be somewhere around 6% for the beer and somewhere around 11 or 19% for the wine. And if you're going to buy distilled hooch, if you're going to go out and buy vodka or tequila, they tend to be 40%, unless you go for the silver rums, and they'll come by and they'll say they're 80 or 90%. The proof, we also use proof as a measure of volume, and that's at exactly twice the percentage volume. So these make sense. These make sense for practical purposes to know that. The work that I presented down in Pueblo was also about not just the reporting of that, was misreporting of that. There's all kinds of problems we have in the regulatory framework involving this uncertainty. Flour is an agricultural product. And one of the things that we learned when we dissected flowers and performed analytic chemistry on as many as 18 to 20 pieces taken from a single flower, we found that a flower that would be reported as having an average concentration of THC of about mid-30s, say 35%, depending upon where we took the sample, not trying to look for hot spots and low spots, we got samples that were as high as 85% and as low as 5%. And that reflects the underlying biology, the botany of the flower. And if you don't take it, if you're not aware of that, you're going to be fooled by that.
And so what advice would you have for consumers who are out there who want to be able to ask the right questions at the places that they're getting their medical or recreational cannabis?
Yeah, that's good too, because I mean, people do need, end users need good advice. I think that the answer is to take the potency data with a grain of salt. I don't care how many decimal places they report on that. Just ignore them. If it says 26, that's 26. And know that even by the regulations, that number only has to be good to plus or minus 15% relative. So that means that could be as much as 3% high or low. So it's 26%. It could be anywhere from 29 to 23. One of the interesting things that I learned at a different conference, a conference that was full of psychologists, one of the folks there, one of the guys, he reported that he studied the self-dosing of a bunch of volunteers with a variety of different strength cannabis products, and found that no matter what the potency was of the products that they started out with, they titrated themselves to the same concentration of THC in their bloodstream. In the main, it's not perfect. It's not totally precise, but they got themselves to the same state, psychoactive state that they wanted to be, and it didn't really matter which one. So you could be a smarter person from the buying public. If you want to just use cannabis as a commodity, say, I don't care it's like beer. I don't care what it tastes like. I just want the alcohol. All right, you can do that. However, besides that, we are sensory animals. Human beings love senses. We go crazy over super expensive wines. We got such a mythology around wines and different kinds of beers, and that's a good holy war. I like this beer. Don't you tell me about that beer. My beer is better than that beer. We'll fight over that, have a good time with that. What kind of cigarettes do you smoke? Oh, I only smoke these. I did say, I noted in my presentation, the Pepsi challenge was the one that I used, and I can tell you for a fact, I think that Pepsi belongs in the litter box. I think it's awful stuff. Yet, given the taste challenge, I can't tell the difference between Pepsi and Coke. So even with my prejudices, I can't support those with my actual senses. Yet, does it affect my purchasing? Sure it does. I'll do that. I like buying blue and green things over red and orange things.
And so speaking of the senses, one of your areas of expertise is the terpenes.
Yes.
And I guess maybe can you even talk a little bit about what terpenes are in general and how they occur in the plant?
Sure. Terpenes are a set of molecules that are often misdescribed. Terpenes are actually a specific set of molecules that contain multiples of a chemical species called the isoprene unit. It's a 5-carbon unit that seems to be quite prevalent in the plant world. Somehow, a long time ago, some plants started using these 5-carbon species, and they started building them up together. And part of the uses that they have put them to is to create aromas. Now, I doubt they put aromas there for humans' benefit, but they probably put them in place so that insects would want to be attracted to them, or animals would want to be rejected by them. So terpenes are a specific set of molecules that are built around a 5-carbon unit. Most of them, not all of them, have strong aroma profiles. Some of them have no strong no aroma profile. They have no sense. I have a library of terpenes in my laboratory that I collect. They're terpenes that have been found in cannabis, and my investigations show that predominantly, in the main, not completely, 5 terpenes make up most of the fragrance of cannabis. You can go to some of my chemical colleagues, and they'll say, oh, we measure 18 terpenes. We have that. And it's like, that's good marketing, but it's not real good science. It's like, used car sales. So you'll find that terpenes are often mixed up with smelly molecules, pleasant smells. There's a correlation, but they're not. I've heard some people refer to terpenes as anything that smells, and that's simply wrong. It's just bad chemistry. It's the molecules that are multiples of the C5, the terpenes, and they make up the smell senses in cannabis. As it turns out, there's a couple of them. Of that 5, there are 3. Some measure those 5 make up most of the fragrances. And one of my colleagues and I also did some work on characterizing that. You can talk about that with him some other time.
What are the 5?
The 5 that I'm referring to are myrcene, alpha-pinene and beta-pinene, limonene, and linalool. Myrcene is an extremely popular molecule with human beings. There's a whole world, of course, of flavors and fragrances out there, and those flavors and fragrances purveyors, they make fragrances for all of our products. You immediately say, well, cologne and perfume have smells, but every laundry detergent has a flavor profile, hopefully not a flavor profile, but it has an aroma profile. All kinds of products have that. Cleaning agents, all sorts of stuff. Myrcene is don't quote me on the number, but I think it's like an $80 million yearly business of making myrcene to go into smell products. Very popular. The pinenes are, true to their names, they're the kinds of things that you would smell from pines, the cedar smell. And the alpha and beta have 2 different smells. Some people characterize them, well, this one's kind of greener and that one's kind of bluer. They have that in there. Then you have limonene, and limonene is a molecule, which is interesting from another aspect. There are 2 versions of limonene, and they are something that we call optical isomers. You can have the same atoms in place with all the same chemical bonds, but you can have them in different physical arrangements. So that one of the limonenes, S or R, pick one of them smells like lemon to us. The other one smells like orange. Okay, and that's a very important one in cannabis. And then the 5th one of that list is linalool. Linalool, funny name, it is the smell of lavender. And if you go to Provence in France, you'll see fields of lavender. That's where we get an enormous amount of our lavender. A lot of folks some folks in some of the western states, California, are trying to develop cultivars to break into that market. But those 5 molecules, you can blend them up, and we have in the XTR data sets. We've measured gazillions of samples and looked at profiles and find out what these 5 molecules, and then some other minor ones, really make up one kind of fragrance or another.
And it's becoming more and more clear to the general public that the different strains or cultivars of cannabis are really defined by those terpene profiles. And what isn't quite known enough is that those terpene profiles really change how the cannabinoids get into your system, and the terpenes themselves do things in the body. So what's it like for you trying to look at the complications of all of these terpenes in the plants, working with all of the endocannabinoid system in a person and trying to figure out what's helpful and what's happening?
Okay, so at the risk of another holy war, what I'll say is that I drive a red car, and I like driving a red car. And I get more speeding tickets than the average bear because clearly red cars go faster than other cars. And I select based on that car. But a car, for me, is transportation, and it also is the roof down. I like that part too. but it doesn't make a dang bit of difference at some level what the color of the car is. It's got 4 wheels, it's got an engine, and it goes as fast as I need it to. This is my scientific view of cannabis. It is the THC, and the THC, to this date, alone that makes the difference. It's like drinking wine. Do you like a red wine or a white wine? Do you like a Merlot, a Malbec? There are lots of different differences. Do you drink margaritas? Does a margarita taste the same on Friday night as it does on Saturday morning? If you're Saturday morning, let's say Saturday afternoon. Does it feel the same earlier? A glass of the same wine, does that affect you the same any other time? Okay, that's not a belief. I have no rigorous data to suggest that the other molecules in cannabis, just like the other molecules in alcohol, have but a minor effect on my consumption and my feelings about the consumption of a particular product.
Wow.
Holy war.
That
Holy
is
war time.
heretical.
It is heretical.
Even with beta caryophyllene actually activating the CB2 receptor, it doesn't. I
don't know
feel
what
like
it feels
enough.
like for my CB2 receptor to be activated. I don't know what that.
That's
I don't know
true.
what my
It ain't in your
pancreas
brain.
feels like.
Yeah.
I eat donuts, and I love donuts, and I love the sugar, but I don't even know when my pancreas is producing more or less insulin. I simply don't know. Now this is heretical because we have the impact, the collision of several different worlds. All right, you have a scientific world which starts out saying there is nothing unless it is demonstrated to be the case. Then we have another world, which is a hopeful world, which says, God, I really hope that this is going to happen like this. And they collide. It's just like selling used cars. Boy, you want that red car, you're going to get a couple extra bucks for a red, we're going to sell this red car more than we are a brown car because people want it. Does it drive faster? I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. That's a different dimension. The color makes a difference. Why is there a range of prices for wine as low as $2 per liter up to $1,000 a liter? It's not because the alcohol's any better in that. It's all the other stuff that's going on in there. And that makes a difference to the purchasing public. And we're entitled to have our preferences. This is going to make me happy. This one's going to make me sad. I got to tell you, I've been smoking for a long time, and it's more about what's going on in my head than what I'm putting in from the outside. And that's that the data that I have, and that puts me, I admit, it puts me in a lunatic fringe here, but this makes sense to me. And as we learn more, culturally, societally, scientifically, as we learn more, then we're going to do something about it. This now, all of a sudden, I mean, like I say, I was a biochemistry major in the early years. All of a sudden, everyone knows about receptors. People don't know about receptors. They don't know the first thing about receptors. They talk about them. It's parlor talk. They know about receptors like they know about fuel injectors. Well, I got a better fuel injector than you do, It's like, so there's a lot of that there, and I spend a lot of time decrying that. And I think that I do people a good service because I think you're entitled. You like Malbecs better. You like Argentinian Malbecs. Have a great time with them. But if someone tries to sell you Argentinian Malbecs futures, says these are the best ones around, then you're not making your own decision. You're being influenced and coerced even into making a decision. So I'm not a real big fan of the sales side of this, which says, oh, you're going to get this kind of a behavior out of it. And I'm like, yeah, right.
Yeah, and I trust you here. Looking at all this lab equipment specifically designed for your terpene work, and then to have you say it's more about the bouquet of the thing.
It's totally.
Than any kind of really measurable effect.
I mean, it is measurable. I like impressionists. I don't like modernists. I get happier when I go to an art museum and I see impressionists. When I see Mondrian, I'm like, that's very interesting. I like that, and I respect it, but it doesn't get me anywhere that a good saison gets me. So it really does have an effect. But let's understand who we are and recognize it is not a physiological effect. It's a psychological effect. And the better human beings get at recognizing their own psychologies, I think the race becomes better. The human race improves because it doesn't get sold a bill of goods. And I hear in a lot of different ways. You look at gasoline prices. When was the last time that you ever saw a gasoline pump price that wasn't 0.9%? When I was a kid, they actually had different values. Some was like 37.1 cents per gallon or 45.5. Everything's 0.9. You buy something new. It's $19.99. It's $9,909.99. That's 100,000, or the next cent up. But we're sold, and I don't like being manipulated myself. So I share from that perspective.
And so that's what you're trying to do here, is more bring a rigorousness to the terpene world.
That's right. Well, we've got things to learn about them. What we can learn about them is just the way perfume colors us. My girlfriend is a real fan of perfumes. I don't think she ever wears the same one twice. Might have happened once since I've known her, but she does different ones, and every one of them we discuss and we debate them because they all smell like a different planet, a different world. There are musks, there are florals, there are citruses. They're all different kinds in there, and they all evoke different things. They make our lives richer. But let's not over embellish the effect that it's having. They're having a psychological effect on us. That's cool.
And so as people come here to do work with you, what are the things that you're working on with different people in the industry?
So this is now a very practical side of XTR's business. Some cultivators come by and they want to check up on whether the state regulated labs are giving them good numbers. They say sometimes, and this has been a common, this was one of the motivations for giving one of those papers. Someone comes by and says, I sent the same plant to 5 different laboratories and I got 5 different numbers. What's wrong with this system? And I say, well, first of all, how different are the numbers? Are they different at the 10% level or the 1% level? And sometimes people are like, well, I got 25.65 and the other one gave me 25.85 and the other one gave me I'm like, that doesn't matter. That's in the noise. But if someone says, I got 35, I got 25, I got 45, then I start saying, let's talk about anatomy, about botany, what the structure of a flower is. Did your laboratories take that? So I help guide them with that. If they have problems, some folks, they want to know, they're interesting, and they say, I'm changing my lights. Is that changing my cannabis, my cannabinoid potency? I can answer that question. They can't do that with the regulated laboratory systems. That's not part of the way that works. We do R&D here. So if you want to try something out, you'll say, this strain, this condition, that, we can do that. We can make those measurements here and answer that question well. We also, because of the profound knowledge that we have in the chemistry activities, we can also answer the questions, how much variability is it in your flower? Does that make sense that you're getting goofy numbers from other labs? What can we do if someone says you have that? So we do that. We also do in there, some folks are just curious. They're like, what is the terpene profile of my plant? I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm going to take your report and put it in a frame and put it on the wall and show the colored bar graphs and say, wow, we've got a lot of linalool in this one. That's kind of fun. We also prepare when at XTR. We experiment. We take various cannabis and separate it into individual terpenes and different components. And we can buy terpenes from chemical companies. And so we spend time educating people on what does the difference between alpha and beta pinene smell. What do you got for that? What does linalool actually smell like? What does lavender smell like? So, as it turns out, I marvel at the fact, because I've been doing this for so long. My nose is trained. I can pick things out. I should test people out, usually students who want to work in my lab. I say, here, smell this reagent. Tell me what it smells like. A student the other day, new student, I gave her a sample of amyl acetate. Amyl acetate is the predominant smell of bananas. She smelt it and said, "Smells like vanilla." I was like, "Really?" And she says, "Yeah." So then I pulled out a bottle of vanillin, ethyl vanillin, and she's like, "No, that's vanilla." I'm like, "What's that?" It takes training. It's just like anything else. You want to be a great a great photo editor, you want to work with colors, it takes training. You're going to learn that. Some people have a greater affinity, a propensity for doing it, a natural. Some of them are naturals. Some are less so. You can train people.
And just like with taste, there are people who are super smellers as well.
Absolutely. And one of the questions is that born or is it trained? And I don't know the answer to that. Other folks know better. But I do know that we can learn that. We can be trained in those regards.
And it's one of the interesting things about smell, if I remember correctly, because it's the only sense that doesn't get routed through some kind of higher level processing system to take out the noise.
Yeah.
And smell just goes directly into the cortex.
Yeah. It seems to be different in great measure from the other senses. And there are a couple of them that taste is unique also. From we think of the senses, we think of sight and sound, and then smell is very different. Taste is different also, and then touch is also very, very different. Our largest organ in our body is our skin, right? So we care about that. But this is all important stuff to know, and you can enjoy it as cocktail party talk or coffee table talk, or you could do it as a profession. You can go either way. It's just important not to. I think, and I always tell myself that, try not to make assertions that I can't back up with data. I know that's not popular these days with the alternate facts, but I ascribe pretty strongly to that. Don't make assertions that I can't support.
And speaking of controversies, what's it like with your university, being someone who studies cannabis on the side, but is also at a research institution with federal funding?
Yeah, this is a real problem, and we're just like the rest of the state, the rest of the country. We're trying to figure out how we're going to find our successful path through here. The university gets an enormous amount of revenue, besides from tuition, from federal research programs. And the Department of Justice is getting a little nasty these days, as it is in a lot of different ways, and says, you guys better be careful because you might jeopardize your research funding. Now, there are, whether that's a legal fight that lawyers would love to have because they'll make all the money on that, but no one wants to have that fight. No one wants to do that. So we have to be very careful on how we do that. In Colorado, we know we have a farm bill, and it is possible for us to do CBD research on campus. CBD, although the Department of Justice has sent out missives in the past year saying that anything that derives from a cannabis plant is considered Schedule 1, whether it be the cellulose from the stalks making hempcrete. That's our position. A lot of the legal experts around the country have just rolled their eyes on that, said it's totally indefensible. We're waiting for the opportunity to have a case that we can fight that. So the CBD is considered safe. Unfortunately, CBD is not where I think the interest is. It's the THC. CBD is an interesting molecule, and when we consider that the known psychoactive dose for average human being, THC, is about 10 milligrams, and folks are using 50 times that, 500 milligrams of CBD to address, to try to impact epileptic seizures. I keep thinking, I'm going to go for the one that's more strong and has a bigger effect, not the one that doesn't. So that's a thing about it. And and folks say, but I don't want to feel I don't want to get high. I'm like, well, just titrate the dose. Don't consume as much. How do you do that? That's an interesting area, and I'm not going to tell you how we're going to solve that, because that's where part of our intellectual property is, where we teach people how to adjust their doses carefully and reproducibly. The pharmacists call that titrating the dose.
And so one last question before I let you back to work, one you may enjoy, is if we could get you a giant research grant to just expand what you're doing here and really grapple with your favorite questions, what direction would you like to take your research, and what would you like to focus on?
What I would like to do is, as a very practical part of our research here, which is we call applied research, and would be to develop a set of products that we currently have in development that would do what I just said, allow people to adjust their titrated dose with great precision and do exactly what they want to do. I've done some marketing studies, and have found folks who use THC for insomnia. Some of them eat cookies that someone makes, and they struggle because sometimes the cookies are hot, sometimes they're potent, sometimes they're weaker, and so every time a new batch of cookies comes in, they have to get it. A new lot of cookies come in, they have to make sure that they're not sleeping for 48 hours, or they don't sleep through the night. These are some aged people who are suffering from age-related illnesses. They're just trying to sleep better. And then they find out that the people who made the cookies did not homogenize the mix enough so that one cookie is not the same as the other. We need to work on those basic pharmaceutical activities and make that available.
Precision in cannabinoids.
Yes.
Well, Doctor, thank you so much for sharing today and for coming on the show.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me here. Hope to speak again sometime.
Sounds great. Greener Grass is a BlueBird Botanicals podcast. Their CBD oil supports a healthy body and a strong endocannabinoid system. They've got friendly customer service who can answer any of your questions, and the number is right there at the top of their webpage. But, per the FDA, they won't be able to make any medical claims for these nutritional supplements. That's also the reason you'll hear little about CBD on this show. There's no need for us to add more evidence about CBD when a simple Google search will give you more than you can read in a month of Sundays. So this show covers the cannabis world and more, with editorial freedom from BlueBird Botanicals. Thanks for joining the Greener Grass podcast. As always, our audio alchemist is Matt Payne. The Gypsy Jazz theme music comes from Brett Van Donsel. Our beautiful bird sounds are courtesy of Lang Elliott. And I'm your host, Lex Pelger, wishing you a bright green day.